Welcome everyone to the Interneighborhood Cooperation Transportation Committee meeting for March 11th, 2021. We have a very full meeting tonight. We have 5 different topics. Some are longer, some are shorter. The agenda is on the screen. Please take a look at the kind of ground rules for INC meetings. There's nothing unusual there. But the session is being recorded, so keep that in mind if you didn't want to appear on the YouTube video upload that we'll do later. I'd like to first introduce James Colbert and Gaby Serrado, who are going to talk to us about bikes on Broadway. And James, if you'd like to share your screen, you should be able to take it over.
Good. That working out for everybody?
Looks great.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is James Colbert. I'm a senior engineer with DOTI in our transportation build group. Here to talk to you about our South Broadway multimodal, which is going to create some high comfort bike lanes, essentially from Cherry Creek to Center Avenue. So kind of thinking first, how do Denverites feel about bicycling? According to a 2018 study by DRCOG, essentially 75% of Denverites indicate that they would ride bicycles if they had the option of a network of high comfort bike lanes. So essentially what that means is, kind of looking at these percentages that, right now without a bike lane, there's a very small percentage of people that are willing to use it as a primary source of transportation. And, I myself feel the same way, right? I used to be in that 4% highly confident bike riders, but as I've kind of gotten older and got my priorities change, I have kids now, I'm finding more and more that being on a roadway with busy cars without protected lanes, I don't feel safe myself. So I can certainly personify with how the other Denverites are feeling when it comes to bike lanes, right? And so what is the benefit of protected bike lane? First and foremost, protected bike lanes are safer. They're a more comfortable experience for the bike users. It increases ridership and it allows the opportunity for shifted trips, right? So if you feel safe and it's convenient for you, people are much more likely to use protected bike lanes versus other modes of transportation. In addition, the safety is increased by reducing the potential for dooring issues, parking and loading conflicts, turning issues, and in general, just reduces stress for everybody, both bicyclists and automobile drivers. So the main goal of this project really is to kind of take steps towards the city's Vision Zero, right? We want to provide a more efficient way for people to get around the city, to kind of create a new way to connect people within the city. Increase connectivity and community business collaboration along with the project. So this project has had a lot of public engagement, including work groups, community outreach meetings. We've met with a number of different neighborhood associations. We've done surveys. We've had, innovative, events like the Bikes and Donuts at Voodoo Donuts, as well as collaborated with Bike Workday. And so we've worked really hard to hear what the community feels about the bike lane and how they would like to see this best implemented. So what did we hear from this? First and foremost, we heard that they want a solid buffer type, right? So as the city's been kind of, trying out a number of different ways to implement bike lanes throughout the city, some of them are just, kind of paint and post type bike lanes, but, the public said that a concrete curb is preferred, and that is what we're going to apply for it. So You can kind of get an idea of what the engineering detail looks like. Going to the final design and construction is going to include a raised concrete buffer to protect the bike lanes from traffic. We also heard that the connection to the Cherry Creek Trail is very important, which makes sense, right? So essentially this project goes from Center Avenue up to Cherry Creek, right? But once another project is completed, it will essentially provide connection from the Cherry Creek Trail to the RTD station at Broadway Station. And, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come type thing, right? If you got a bike lane that doesn't go anywhere, nobody's going to want to use it, right? And so we're providing a good connection to the Cherry Creek Trail up near Spear Boulevard, and it's going to go through the plaza area and connect down to the Cherry Creek Trail, as well as tie into you can kind of see along 7th Avenue. Another project, bike lane project, is going to tie into the system that we're creating. So you're going to have multiple different options and ways to kind of get where you want to go and using bike networks.
Do I achieve?
That's why I'm using every car I have.
Visibility and safety is important. Was also important to the residents, right? And so as part of that, we're going to be employing newer techniques, which we call like hardened center line. And so that's basically raised plastic medians, like you see in this photo right here, to kind of help bring visibility to the bike lanes for drivers. In addition, we're going to have raised pedestrian refuge areas, right? So in addition, so we're not just looking at just bike lanes, we're also considering what pedestrians are going to be doing throughout the corridor, right? And so we're also going to be installing raised pedestrian refuge, which essentially shorten the distance pedestrians have to go as they cross intersections, right? So obviously, if it's a shorter distance, it takes less time, and it gives them, overall improved safety for all the users. ADA accessibility is going to be important. So essentially, all of the intersections within the project where we're doing civil improvements, we're going to be upgrading the ADA ramps as necessary, right? So if any existing ADA ramps still meet the requirements, we potentially would leave those, but most of the intersections, I would say the overwhelming majority of them, we're going to be replacing all the ADA ramps, compliant and meet the ADA criteria. Also to continue and help with the visibility and safety within the bike lanes, we're planning on upgrading 13 of the signals along the corridor that are going to include bike lane signals at all those locations as well as part of the project to help, obviously users better navigate the corridor. Bikeway connections and local access are going to be important as well. So like I mentioned before, we're going to have connectivity at a number of locations with the other bike lane projects that are happening within the area from the CTN networks and others like that, as well as we'll be exploring left turns, bike and pedestrian spaces. So, we heard all of those things as we kind of worked our way through the process, and then we started implementing them through our design. So essentially with the 30% design, we took a look at, well, how much space do we have, right? And then what's the best way to make the best use of those space, right? You kind of had to think, well, what fits, how wide can the lanes be, the bus lanes be, how wide can the bike lanes, parking, what makes the best sense? And as we move from 30% to 60%, we then kind of started to really figure out, well, what are the real details here, right? So how are all these, different concepts going to fit within the space we have available, and where do they seem to make the most sense, right? So that's the ADA ramps, our center lines we talked about, the locations where we're going to have the flex posts and certainly our concrete curbs, as well as other things that get impacted when we start changing curb lines and ADA ramps is storm drainage, and stormwater and moving and adjusting inlets is necessary to provide better drainage within the intersections. And so, you know, through 60%, you know, we really kind of started to better understand, well, what is it going to look like, right? You know, what are those details? And then what are the other things we need to look at, such as utility impacts, grading, signing, striping, and the other amenities along the corridor. As we, and then as we moved into final design, that's really kind of when we really have a solid feel for what all those details are going to look like. You know, so this right here is kind of a better example of what the connection to the Cherry Creek is going to look like, right? So we've got the plaza area that's, you know, at the intersection of Spear and Broadway, where it provides a nice transition area to kind of move from the elevated section of the South Broadway to make the way down to the Cherry Creek Trail. And as well as I mentioned along 7th right there, that connection to the other bike lane systems that are being installed. And so you can kind of see here some of our final details, kind of gives you an idea of just all the different things we're going to be doing within the intersection. So this is the intersection of Irving and Archer right here. Excuse me, no, my title is wrong. It's Ellsworth and Irvington. But so you can see right here the purple dashes right there. Those show where we're going to have the raised concrete curbs. The kind of what I would call that color, kind of like a peachish color. Those are you know, raised pedestrian areas, you know, to shorten up the distance for pedestrian crossings. The red you're seeing here is showing our bus lane improvements, as well as where we're going to have passenger loading and parking, as well as additional signing and striping and signals. And then also the yellow thing, the little yellow area right there, you'll see that's where we're taking a look at some of throughout the corridor, looking at the existing trees. And, you know, if you've been down Broadway recently, you can see that some of the trees along the corridor are not in the best shape. So we're trying to help them as best we can. So where we're impacting the existing trees, we're planning on a concept, what we call Breathe a Tree, which essentially rebuilds the tree grade to our current standards. So most of them, the existing ones along the Broadway corridor, are only like 5x5 openings. And so like that yellow one you see on the screen right there is going to be a 5 foot wide by 15 foot long tree grade. Similar to if you've been out recently, there's the redevelopment at 99 South Broadway. Gives you an idea of kind of what they're going to look like. And essentially what it does is it just gives a much better growing environment for the trees. And, you know, so the idea is, while we aren't going to be adding a lot of new trees to the project, the ones that are there, we're going to try to give them that we're impacting, give them a much better growing environment. So down at the south end of the project, you can kind of see as it in the interim, I guess you would say, the project is going to transition, the bike lane is going to transition along to Center Avenue. And then in the future, the I-25 project, I-25 and Broadway project, is going to bring the connection from Center Avenue down to Exposition and the Broadway station. That will come a little bit after this project, but that's certainly in the works. Just gives you an idea. The Broadway project, I believe, is going to be 2 or 3 phases. The reddish phase right here is phase 1, and that does include the connection kind of from Exposition up to Center Avenue. That's not my project, but just giving you an idea of what's going on. So we are, as a bond project, we are kind of limited as far as, you know, what we can use these funds for. And while we can't go crazy with all sorts of placemaking along the corridor, we do have the opportunity to include public art in the project through city ordinance. And so we've partnered up with our Denver Arts and Venues, and through a separate process that's outside of the project. So I'm not responsible for this, but our friends in Arts and Venue have gone out and solicited for art along the project. And they had a very robust response to their RFP with 182 artists responding to their RFP. How did they pick everybody? Well, we had a selection committee that included local artists, representatives from the local maintenance districts, the council office, as well as members from the community. And at the end of that process, they boiled it down to selecting artists. Her name is Jeannie Paulus. She's from Indianapolis, Illinois. Excuse me, Indianapolis, Indiana. And her art, she kind of focuses, I guess you would say kind of has whimsical signs, would be kind of the best way to describe it. Now, we don't have an official idea of what the art is going to be at this point. We anticipate we're going to have somewhere between 5 and 8 art pieces throughout the quarter, depending on final funding. And the location and actually what they're going to be is kind of an ongoing process that's going to happen. The art will be installed after construction is done of the bike lanes, but I should say in conjunction with that, right? So we're going to coordinate with the artist and arts and venue to help find the most appropriate and safest locations for these art installations to make sure that we don't have any site issues or other problems associated with where they're located. And if there's any sort of concrete or foundations or anything else like that that need to be installed, we'll work those into our construction plan so they aren't tearing up anything we just build or causing more construction down the road. And so we anticipate those to be installed. So they're going to probably finalize the plans at the end of this year and they'll be installed after construction. So talking more about timing, right? So this effort started way back in 2015 with the test bike lanes along Broadway. And we learned a lot from that, right? So we collected a lot of data, collection, reporting, and essentially what that original effort led to is 2 different projects, right? So the first of which being from the north, what we call the north segment of Broadway, which is from Spear connecting up to Civic Center Park, Civic Center Station. And that project is currently in the conceptual stage, right? Waiting for funding. So right now that one's really not moving forward until we identify additional funding. But the south segment, which is this project, is moving forward, right? So obviously we've made it through conceptual and detailed design. We're in the process of working on our final designs now, with final designs scheduled to wrap up the middle of this year, with following that, wrapping up our right-of-way acquisition and other approvals. We anticipate construction starting in 2022. And so if anyone wants to learn more about the project or about our previous efforts or previous presentations, you can certainly find us at the bit.ly/Broadway Multimodal. And we can also be reached via email at denvermovesbroadway@denvergov.org. And with that, open it up to questions.
Thank you so much for the overview. We have a few questions in the chat, and I'll just pick on folks and ask them to unmute and ask their questions. Let's start with Chris Miller.
Hi there, and also Katie on Tesla behind me. Is it a DOTI goal to speed up the implementations of protected bike lanes, given that this one took 8 years? And are there any lessons from this project?
Well, I mean, so I would say that taking 8 years is not necessarily fair, right? I mean, it's been a planning process along the way. The city is interested in speeding up bike lane projects. This one is more complicated than what we're doing in some of our other projects, right? So other bike lane projects are not reconstructing 13 different signals along the corridor. Other bike lane projects are much simpler and might be like painting in post projects, and those will get implemented much quicker, right? It's a lot easier to just put up some signs and restripe the road versus reconstructing intersections and redoing drainage and all the other infrastructure associated with that. This is a much bigger project on a much busier corridor than some of our other bike lanes. And as far as like lessons learned, I'm not sure, maybe Gaby might be a better person. She's involved in a lot more bike lane projects than myself. I don't know, Gaby, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that obviously, like James was saying, this one is a massive one because again, we're reconstructing 13 signals and the drainage. There are obviously after once we achieve 100%, this is one of those debriefings about what could have gone faster and sooner through as I'm not sure which one would be the next one down the line that will be this and this. But in general, I think what we have learned from bikeway projects, CTMs and paving projects and so forth is let's try to pretty much slam them as much as possible, even though it feels like it's shoving information down people's throat. Like for example, on the West Denver Safer Streets, that initial public meeting that we had, instead of trying to have like 3 quarters at a time, we slammed 7 onto that first concept meeting. So we're trying to sort of like trying to narrow as much as possible that initial phase, which can sometimes come and will bite us in the butt later. But it's one of those things that we know that we're going towards that goal of 125 miles by 2023, like 2 years from now or something like that. We are trying to slam as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And as we get perfected into what works well in a corridor, when it's a neighborhood bikeway or a protected bikeway, when it comes to like those traffic calming elements, like obviously we're gaining a whole lot of more experience with our consultants on trying to design them faster as well. The implementation, obviously we're still rolling them out. So they're a lesson that we need to figure out how to shorten that rollout time frame.
Barbara DeSaro has a question about maintenance.
One other.
Oh, James, please go ahead.
If I could just kind of add one more thought to that, right? So I certainly can understand, from a perspective that it's certainly taken a long time for the project, but just to note, there's been a lot of things that have happened along the way. So such as like in 2018, there was a change in state legislation that required a change in the way that we design things. So essentially what that means is we have to get a lot more utility information with any project that we design. So with that change, this project had to be compliant. So we had to get additional funding and additional contracting because our designers weren't scoped to provide that information. So there's been a lot of stuff along the way.
Okay, Barbara.
My question was, well, I worked for CDOT for many years in roadway design, and we always had to coordinate with the maintenance folks to make sure that we're not making a problem for them. So I was just wondering how the Broadway will get plowed with that raised curb or the raised plastic buffer.
Plowed specifically, so we have been coordinating with the LMD about obviously these improvements, but specifically for plow, actually, I think like about 2 years ago, we rolled out a specific sort of like a special equipment plow system that is just for protected bikeways. So it's not the big trucks that you see out there. They're just specifically, for the width of just our protected infrastructure bike facilities. And they're primarily obviously right now being used in downtown because that's where we have the majority of their protected elements.
Okay, thank you.
Speaking of the protection, Robert Greer had a question about the 6-inch concrete buffer or the plastic separations protecting bikes from heavy vehicles and trucks. What's the protection going to be like? How are we going to make this as safe feeling and as safe in actuality as possible for even the most interested but concerned cyclists?
So I'm not quite sure I follow the question, but it sounds, I mean, the raised concrete buffer is going to be essentially from end to end along the corridor. I mean, I don't know, Gaby, you have a better way to answer?
Yeah, so it's, so I'm guessing like, I'm guessing the question is, that level of protection. So it's going to be like a concrete median. I guess that's like a smaller version of a concrete median between the general travel lanes and the bike lane, and where the actual cycle track, the two-way cycle track will be at. So that's the level of protection that is going to be in there. It's not going to be, in one massive, right, James, is going to be sort of like in, there's going to be breaks in between the actual elements, and that is for drainage inconsistencies. Otherwise, we would have to like truly rebuild the entire thing. So it's that, that's what I'm hoping that the question is about. It's not going to be like the traditional, like the protected bikeway that we have right now on 13th or 14th, where is the flex post and the curb stop, which is a very heavy duty plastic, but it's still plastic. This was going to be concrete itself.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of comments. You can take a look at the chat. Number of comments about the art, of course, and I think that's a topic unto itself. But there's some good feedback in there. I had just a phasing question. What happens at the southern end of the current scope before the I-25 and Broadway project comes along? Does the lane disappear? Are cyclists that had some of the best cycle lane in the city suddenly with nothing? What's the interim plan?
So in the interim, until it happens, it will turn onto Center Avenue West.
So people on bikes trying to get to a destination like I-25 and Broadway rail station, what would be their safe route?
So they would make basically a right turn onto Center Ave. So we're going to have, I believe we're going to have the striping basically guiding them over to the inside of the D4 development, where they would take basically, I believe at that point is no, it's not Cherokee. Oh, it's not Bayard. I can't remember. I'm so sorry. It's Cherokee or Bayard, one of those two that basically will connect you. It's more like a sidewalk path, once you reach inside the RTD sort of parking lot. But that would be sort of that connection. Or of course, you can continue traveling on Broadway. Unfortunately for the time being, on the white sidewalk that we have, on the west side, that would connect down to the station itself.
Okay, so that will be legal for bikes to be on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have packed a lot of.
Thank
Bannock.
you. Sorry, Bannock. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
Allison and Lucia, thank you. Okay, well, we've packed a lot of topics into this meeting. This is a big effort. As we've heard, it's taken years to get here. A lot of planning and then funding. The voters voted to fund this, which is fantastic. But it's also got to be our premier two-way cycle track in the city. It has to show people that this is possible, and bikes belong even on our big arterials, especially because that's where all the attractions are that people are trying to go to and from. So really appreciate all your work here. And if you could just go back one slide for a moment, James, to let people capture how to contact the team and how to find more information. A lot of love coming your way in the comments, people saying they can't wait to ride it. You do a great job. Gaby's a rock star in DOTI on bike things. Follow her online. Everyone's favorite planner.
And I'll be happy to respond to some of the questions in the chat that we're not able to answer right now, by the way. So
great, thank you very much. Okay, let me switch back to just sharing my screen, and I'll share just our overview here. While we introduce Nick Williams to introduce David Krutsinger in his first week on the job. Nick, would you like to do introductions?
Sure would. Let me make my angles right here. Yes, so Joel, thank you. Many of you probably remember in 2018, Denver voters approved a charter change to the city charter that would shift what was then Public Works to the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. it wasn't just a name change, it also added a few new authorities that better aligned with the direction that the city is taking as it relates to kind of multimodal. One of those specifically was talking about the city becoming more involved in transit and transit activities. So as the voters passed, we have now hired our first transit director. And so I'm happy to introduce and allow him to speak a little bit, Mr. David Krutsinger. David?
Thanks for the introduction, Nick. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be the city's first transit director. I've lived in the city for 25 years and a couple more years just east of the Virginia Village Goldsmith neighborhood boundary. I grew up in Boulder, so I've been in Colorado for most of my life. Worked at RTD for 9 years, CDOT for 9 years, and in a couple of consulting firms for 9 years. So and almost all of my practice has been in transit. I've done a fair amount with bicycles as well. Was RTD's bicycle transit planner for a handful of years, around 2005, 2007. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join the city of Denver, where I live and now work, and look forward to talking and interacting with all of you more as we try to grow transit throughout the city. Thank you.
Welcome, and we're delighted to be able to invite you to what will apparently be a 9-year term at the city of Denver. David or Nick, can you tell us a little bit about what's in the scope of the transit division within DOTI?
Sure. The transit division is getting its start. We've got a great transit team within the planning unit who have helped conceptualize such things as the early parts of Colfax Bus Rapid Transit, some of the bus lanes downtown, and the renovations to 16th Street Mall. Those projects are all underway. And then looking out to 2040, a more comprehensive network of enhanced bus corridors and enhanced operating services to complement what RTD is able to do with their regional dollars. Nick, feel free to add anything if I missed anything that you would note.
Sure. Hopefully this isn't a surprise, David, but this would also include the DOTI transit program in general. Will include kind of our participation in micro transit and micromobility, which we're going to talk about after this on there. So really is kind of that overseeing how do we manage our public transportation system here in the city. Another thing kind of always want to stress with this, I think we around the time of the charter change, folks said, oh, okay, so does this mean you guys are going to replace RTD? And it certainly does not mean that. We have a very positive working relationship with RTD. This will supplant, RTD's activities. Of course, RTD is a regional agency, and their goals are based around regional goals. And the city also has some very specific city-based needs, and we really see this role in this program as a way to supplant RTD as opposed to replace.
A supplement, I imagine, not supplant.
Yeah, it's been a long day, Joe.
It is. We have these meetings at night just to see what the long day has done to people. When Denver Moves Transit as part of the overall Denver Right effort wrapped up, it had the vision for where we want really upgraded transit throughout the city, but it kind of left off before scoping and pricing, and then prioritizing the order that they're going to be pursued in. Is the second phase of that detailed planning going to start soon under your watch, David?
Yes, I'm collaborating with the folks who had put the RFP together, and so I'll be adding some knowledge to that, but I think you'll see some familiar faces going forward running the Denver Moves Transit 2.0.
Great. And it's not 2.0 in that it replaces this new plan. It's the next more detailed planning.
That's exactly right.
I imagine. Okay. Looking forward to that, because we need to not only make our transit work better, but make our streets work better for transit. And that's clearly Denver and where applicable CDOT's role. We've got about 5 minutes for questions to David or Nick about the transit division, and can either type a quick question in or raise your hand and I'll call on you. Raise your virtual hand. All right, Amanda Roberts.
Hi, yeah, speaking to sort of following up what you said, Joel, can we talk complete streets with transit overlays? Like, can we start talking about that in terms of Denver Moves transit? Like, how are those connected? What are the conversations you're having in terms of traffic calming on streets where buses are run and making the pedestrian experience safe and actually installing transit facilities that are something you'd want to use?
So I'll say yes, Denver's thinking in complete street ways, and I'm so glad that the bike team gave the presentation before me. To make the transportation network function, it's got to be useful for bicyclists, pedestrians, and when people need to use their cars for motorists as well. So we're thinking all across all the modes, whether and all types of users, wheelchair, walking, biking, and trying to make sure that we do that. So the vision for the transit division is small to large infrastructure. I mentioned the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit as being large infrastructure. We're doing speed and reliability studies to figure out how to improve the ability of buses to keep up with or beat congested traffic. And then we're looking at sidewalk improvements, bus stop improvements, and other things like that to make it easier to get to and from neighborhoods, to and from businesses, because you may only be a transit user for part of your trip. Hope that answers your question, Amanda.
Can I just add, to the question, yeah, that David and the transit division are working closely with our planning team and making sure that, yes, when we talk complete streets, transit is part of that.
Okay, just turning to questions, there's a question from Robert Greer. Robert, you're asking a lot of questions about air pollution, which is important. Do you want to see if Nick can give a perspective on that?
Please, thank you.
Nick, in the chat, there's a question about air pollution. Air pollution is certainly an issue everywhere, and with the inversions we have here in the Mile High City, and on major arterials where so much traffic, car, truck, bus traffic goes. Just a question on what are we doing big picture to make it safer for bikes, where we're directing them to where there is a lot of pollution, but also in general air pollution in the city.
Sure, and we have a kind of a maybe potentially indirect role in kind of air pollution and managing and improving that. There's a number of different agencies, regional, RAC, DRCOG, as well as the state, certainly under some of the activities with greenhouse gas. I think sounds like you're talking specifically to particulate matter, and obviously that's going to be affected a lot by heavy duty trucks, things like that. I'm going to get way out of my wheelhouse here if I go too much more into this, but certainly electrification activities like that, I think will impact pollution rates, and certainly kind of the drive towards more transit obviously takes off vehicles off of the road. So I think that's kind of, I think any more than that, I'm getting too far outside of my wheelhouse of the DOTI world here, but I think it's all related. Certainly multimodal and encouraging folks to better utilize bicycle transit, all of that. Okay, I see these questions come up. I think it's all related. Hopefully all of these are starting to work towards a better future.
Okay. Certainly some bigger cities across the world have started to have zero emissions areas and areas where we have congestion pricing to try to limit motorized vehicle traffic. We're not there as Denver yet, but the sustainability goals that came out of a recent working group have all these big picture ideas. So I'm really interested in how those big picture ideas and insistence that we play our part in the world start running into each of our departments and their goals. Let's see. Question on transit, on micro transit, not micromobility, but small buses and such. Is it yet time to talk about where the circulators will be running that Denver will operate?
I'll start and defer to Nick if I've missed anything, just being my first week, but we're looking at Montbello as our first demonstration area. And then we've got a couple other neighborhoods that we're considering for that. So we'd like to get our toe in the water with our first micromobility, microtransit example, and then learn from that experience, just like the bike folks have learned from their initial installations, and then expand from there.
The idea being these are neighborhoods that, due to their design, aren't well served by transit. They're lower density. They aren't regular grids, so it's hard to run transit, but there's high quality regional transit nearby. So connecting that last mile, is that the key idea?
I think that is a key idea, and exactly so. Thanks.
And we did kind of dip our toe in that. I'm sorry, the years are running together with the last couple of years with the Chariot service, which you may still see some versions of that running around the DU area. Unfortunately, Ford purchased Chariot and had other ideas about microtransit, but we are still committed to the concept and, kind of as David said, looking at certain areas, including Montbello, to get this back up. Thank you. Stephen would know. It's 2018.
Yeah, that was an interesting pilot, and in a dense area of town, so little different goals there. All right, well, welcome, David. Welcome to stick with us as we go to our next topic. Nick is going to stay with us, and we'll introduce Stephen Rijo to talk about. It's a little preview, but not yet ready to. No announcements tonight. But where are we going? More than a year ago, Nick joined us to talk about micromobility. So bike shares, scooter shares, and a change of direction that the city wanted to take there. Now he's back just a little more than a year later to say, okay, the city set out its intentions. It put out a request for proposals, or whatever the technical term was that was used, and kind of go over how things have proceeded and then what to keep an eye out for. Nick and Stephen, welcome. And feel free, whoever has the presentation, to share your screen.
I think Mr. Rijo is going to drive, but while
I have it, but I don't have access as a co-host. So if you could maybe.
Okay, I'm about to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
While you're doing that, yeah, thank you, Joel. And just, I don't think I introduced myself formally previously. I'm Nick Williams. I'm the acting chief of staff for DOTI. I'm joined today by Mr. Stephen Rijo, senior planner here. Yeah, as Joel said, we had hoped that this would be a triumphant announcement for this meeting. We are very close to being able to make an announcement. We'll talk more in detail what we're looking at. Unfortunately, we are still finalizing some final negotiations. It's been a kind of a new process for us, taking a little longer than we would have hoped. So I can talk, what I'm going to talk today about is the pilot program, kind of what we learned from that and how we applied those lessons to our formal procurement for that. I can't go into details on who was picked or what exactly they're going to do. And that information will actually probably come out within the next couple of weeks on that. I just can't get ahead of our kind of procurement process on that. So with that, yeah, I'll kind of start us off. I'll give you the what's now becoming longer and longer history of micromobility in Denver. Do the next slide. So before there were scooters, in 2008, Denver became one of the very first large-scale municipal bike share programs with the B-cycle program. This came in kind of around the 2008 Democratic National Convention that was hosted in Denver, started, I think, about 1,000 bikes that was eventually parlayed into a permanent program. So these are the docked bikes that you saw, red bikes. And that was really our first kind of foray into micro mobility. About 10 years later, as B-cycle was operating, dockless bikes started to become popular. I think it really originated in China, and the city decided to do a small-scale pilot in the DU area, utilizing a company, OFO. So OFO worked with DU to provide the service for their students, and the city provided some permit structure and with an expectation that that the vehicles would stay in the DU area. That OFO, I don't think lasted quite a year and kind of pulled up shop and disappeared. There was actually one bike, you'll see them still, some ghost bikes floating around. In the summer of 2018, and it was actually about a week after I joined DOTI, first one and then two dockless scooter companies decided to deploy in Denver without prior authorization. We asked them to not do that. They declined, so we snatched a lot of them up and levied some heavy fines and said, how about you don't do it and we'll quickly develop a pilot program. And at that point, they were more amenable to our suggestion. Go to the next slide. So in August of 2018, a couple months after the unauthorized launch, we launched a pilot program. And this pilot program was based out of what is known as our transit amenities program, which typically funds the advertising around bus stops, but also includes some pilot clauses that allow us to do some things like this. So we use that as a vehicle to do a pilot. We issued 5 permits for scooters and offered 5 permits for bikes. We started, sorry, I've lost screen. We started with 350 scooters per scooter operator, and 500 vehicles per bike operator. We quickly had 5 scooter companies take us up on it. The bikes proved considerably less popular and only had one jump that you see down there at the bottom take us up initially. We did have Lime join us and then depart soon thereafter, deciding to focus on scooters. Quite a few challenges, I think, with the pilot program initially. One being just a need to adjust ordinances to better reflect kind of what these vehicles were and how they were being used. That actually took us 2 tries to hopefully get that right, but eventually settle on that kind of just quite simply, scooters can be ridden where bikes can, and they can't be ridden where bikes can't. So really think sidewalk on that. Steve, you want to do the rest of the bullets here just so I can. The program did prove to be very, very popular. This is one of the more successful markets. I think as of January, we've seen about 7 million trips covering, about 6 million trips covering a little over 7 million miles on this. But it was a relatively steep learning curve. And we'll look at some data here, but really the program ended up primarily downtown centered. That is where the market was, and that's where the vehicles flowed. And that's something that we wanted to address, and Stephen's going to talk a little bit about with the RFQ. Do the next slide. So as I mentioned, we had 5 scooter companies take us up: Bird, Lime, Lyft, Razor, and Spin. Razor has since departed the market, but we still have the other 4 out there. Jump started with 500 bikes, stayed with 500 bikes. They were actually acquired by Lime during this, but they continue to operate. And as I mentioned, Lime came and went with their bikes as they focused on scooters. Next slide. This slide gives you kind of an idea of where the scooters were being utilized. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. On the left, you see kind of the scooter heat map. On the right, the e-bike heat map. Again, it's going to be primarily focused in the downtown urban core. And while we want to provide, certainly those mobility options downtown, those first mile, last mile, we also want this to be a service that's available to as many Denver residents as possible. I think it was referenced before, with microtransit, micromobility also has the potential to really fill in gaps in the transit network on there for folks. And so kind of trying to get these distributed more evenly across the city, or certainly spread more broadly, was a goal of the RFQ. Next slide. So I think, some of the biggest challenges were certainly safety and parking etiquette. This is a new mode. This is a new thing. No one before 2018. I mean, you'd seen a few kick razor scooters, but this was a totally new thing on the right of way. Certainly some folks didn't care to follow rules, and a lot of folks just didn't know the rules. And we've tried to do some pretty good outreach and work really closely in conjunction with the operators to better educate folks. But a lot of these, you see situations where the scooters are blocking pathways, or kind of on your right, which looks great for the pathway, but also you can't park a vehicle that close to the curb. And so it's really been a matter of trying to educate folks on the proper way to do this. Next slide. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Mr. Rijo to kind of talk about our RFQ process and kind of what is next. Stephen?
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Nick. And for those on the call, I'm looking forward to chatting with you about this. My name is Stephen Rijo. I'm a transportation planner on our transit planning team in the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. So I think just with that speaks volumes that DOTI's really viewing these as a piece of our transit network, part of our service connecting to and from things. But based on what Nick was saying, we initiated a formal procurement process, really saying that, we've learned a lot of lessons from the pilot program. How can we carry that into a more formal citywide program? And so with that, I think, really glad we took the time to do the pilot. As Nick said, some rules were changed over the course of it, a lot of lessons learned, just the learning curve of things. But that a few key pieces were really viewing the new program as much more of a partnership. Right under the pilot program, we were really just regulators providing permits to operate, but it was much more of a one-way street, just allowing them to operate in our right-of-way. And so trying to have much more of a partnership where we're pursuing, mutually beneficial outcomes. Because I think, as Nick alluded to with OFO, if a company goes out of business, then we're all in a worse place. So how can we have really viewing this as a partnership where the city providing access to our right-of-way, we expect some benefits in return. As Nick mentioned, really focusing on a much more citywide program, and I have a map later to detail that. But really, as for various reasons, the vehicle's really focused around downtown with both the B-cycle system and the shared micromobility pilot. So trying to make this an option that anyone can step out of their door and have access to one of these vehicles in a block or two. Additionally, we have our mobility action plan goals that are really key to everything we're working on here. So targeting a 50% SOV rate, which stands for single occupancy vehicle or driving alone. And Denver often hovers more in the high 60s, low 70s. So really significant goal reduction that we're targeting there. And we view these as a key piece of that. And then sort of lastly, shooting for a much more equitable program, little things like it being citywide, but then similarly, just some of the offerings so that this can be an affordable option for all of Denver residents, regardless what affordable may mean to an individual. So with that, we initiated the RFQ process in the spring of 2020. We've been negotiating with a finalist or finalists since then, and really targeting an April launch. So hopeful that, as Nick mentioned, we'll make some announcements in the coming weeks, and then hopefully can have the new program up and running soon after. So with that, DOTI has an equity index that is central to a lot of the work we do. And it's a compilation of various indices, looking at demographic factors like percentage of minority populations, populations in poverty, education levels, traffic safety, access to vehicles, just to name a few. There are a lot of indices that feed into this. And so it's a pretty robust way that we look around the city and understand where might we need to focus some investments, where maybe has there been a lot of investment and we maybe should look elsewhere for a little bit. And while, during the pilot program, when that was getting pulled together quickly, we utilized the car share equity program, or rather kind of areas to guide that. But learning from the pilot and similarly, moving forward to this program, have been able to use the equity index in a more robust way to really hone in on parts of the city that we want to make sure these vehicles are accessible in. And so with that, you can see what we're calling opportunity areas highlighted in red here. And so these are parts of the cities where we're asking operators to put 30% of their daily deployment. So every day when they're balancing their vehicles in the morning, 30% of the total number of vehicles will need to be in these red areas. And as you remember with the heat map that Nick showed you, that really wasn't the case. I'm not sure if folks can see my mouse, but often it was focused in the downtown core. And so, I'm excited that we'll just have access to these vehicles in all neighborhoods across the entire city. But then, similarly having them there daily can really start to be a transportation method that folks can count on, as opposed to maybe something that's fun when you're downtown or more of a one-off. And so again, I'll get into a little bit more of this later, but I think it's a key piece of, both economic equity, but then similarly geographic equity, trying to make sure that anyone who lives in Denver, maybe works, commutes in Denver, can take advantage of these vehicles. So with that, another key piece of the new program is that it provides free and subsidized rides for Denver's residents. And, a lot of these operators provide need-based programs. So if you qualify for local, state, or federal assistance programs, they often have that built into their pricing structures where you pay kind of an equivalent amount based on that. So it's great that a lot of the operators provide that already, but, moving beyond that, we asked in the RFQ process for a meaningful quantity of free and or subsidized rides. And so the finalists that we're working with are offering that. And I think, really excited to talk to you all about that more freely when we can, but a significant investment in discounted rides for Denver's residents. And, with the photos there, modeling this somewhat off of the B-Cycle program's 5280 free rides that existed back before they closed up. So this was an example where the city bought up a number of rides and provided free passes to 5,280 residents. Again, modeling it off of that, taking it further. So really excited to provide more benefits for Denver's residents there. Then lastly, another key piece of the program we're really excited about, bikes, 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 is that we learned Denver's residents, commuters, visitors, people who spend time in Denver really do enjoy bikes. To Nick's point with B-Cycle, it was doing hundreds of thousands of trips a year, many, many miles. And so there was an interest there that unfortunately was lost when they closed up shop in 2020. But then similarly, Denver has a pretty rich history of bike events, right? We have Bike to Work Day photographed there and some of the posters. And then, some of the more historical ones of Tour de Fat or Denver Cruiser rides, where we just know that Denver really does enjoy using bikes. I think there are also some hypotheses, perhaps bikes are better for longer trips. Maybe there's a safety benefit to riding bikes. So whatever the case may be, we did notice that during the pilot, there were fewer bikes in operation, as Nick showed with those numbers, and maybe less of an incentive for the operators to have bikes for whatever reason. And so a key part of the new program is requiring a bike quantity of at least 20% of the e-scooter fleet. And so I know that's a bit wordy, and the way I often describe it to folks is if an operator was allowed to have 100 e-scooters, if that was their cap, then they would be required to have 20 bikes in addition to that for a entire vehicle count of 120. So 20% of what's allowed with your scooter fleet is required in bikes. And we thought this was just, again, when I'm talking about partnership, I'm working with them to say, hey, if we're providing, semi-exclusive use of the right of way or exclusive use of the right of way, which we know is pretty valuable, we want to extract some value from that for Denver's residents, specifically making sure that people have access to bikes and e-bikes. So that's another piece of the program we're pretty excited about. And then getting towards the end here, parking and education are another really key piece of this program. As Nick talked about in the pilot, I think, there were learning curves at the beginning, right? As we all learned how to drive and how to park a car. I think folks similarly were learning how to ride and park these vehicles. And so, yeah, whether it was intentional or not, I think there was just a true learning curve. And I often show this photo in the top right as, kind of a humbling experience for me. This was a learning curve that you're not allowed to park vehicles like this. You are allowed to park them below the curb, but not that close to other cars, similar to how we don't allow people to park cars up against each other. That would be a ticketable offense. You can't park scooters there. So I think just, again, speaking to myself when I dived into the ordinance, learned something new. But some other examples there: blocking the right of way, vehicles knocked over, some that might be broken. This was definitely a big focus of the formal program. How can we remedy this? Viewing these folks as partners. So we've been working with our parking agents, who are often, in dense parts of the city, out walking around, looking at meters and parking. So is this something that we can add to their normal beats and make sure that we have better compliance in the right of way? That's definitely been the focus of the new program. Data sharing is key for many reasons, but I think specifically for parking violations, education, things like that, where it can help us understand, where is this a problem? Is it that we have one resident who's really diligent about calling out the issues they see in front of their house? Or is it that there really is a higher incidence of an issue on a certain block in a certain area? And so while this has been a bit of a blind spot from a data perspective in the pilot program, building in triggers in this new formal program that we can much better understand what's the scale of this, thinking down the line, do we need more agents? Do we need to think of different violation structures? But again, those things that come with a partnership. Education for users is another really key piece of the new contracts that, it currently, there's some incentive for operators to provide education, but we've really set up an incentive structure, carrots and sticks, such that it's really in the operator's best interest to make sure that their users are parking correctly and that they themselves and their staff are deploying these vehicles correctly. And similarly, there are really triggers that if deployment is not going well and or utilization is low, there may be some influence to the fleet size. Vice versa, if it is going well and there's high utilization, it could leave some changes to the fleet sizes as well. And so baked into all of that, really, if there's issues, we understand it in data, there's incentives to educate where that problem is happening. And we'll have our parking agents actually working on this, which really during the pilot program, it was much more of a solving serious issues, but it wasn't something that we had trained those folks on. And so then the last piece of this, and I think this is my last bullet here, is some infrastructure investments. So as Nick mentioned, with the transit amenity program, much of the pilot program was just locating these vehicles close to transit. Really great for solving that first and final mile problem, but left something to be desired in these being more broadly spread around the city and or maybe more organized. And so working with the future program to make sure that we have infrastructure. And this could scale everything from looking like a B-cycle station, and maybe it's much more focused like a charging infrastructure. It could be, a organized and or branded thing that looks more like a bike rack out in the right of way. And then in, less dense parts of the city where maybe it doesn't make sense to install a bike rack or a charging system station, having a painted box on the ground that, shows you where to park these, has a virtual notification in the app that lets folks know. So requiring the operators to invest a significant amount in stations and infrastructure around the city to better organize the system. So I think those are some of the highlights. And with that, happy to transition to questions.
Okay, this is going to be a little interesting because, of course, we're not asking questions about the specific operator, but with the intentions of the program, how you see it regulated. Amanda Roberts had a question that a lot of people supported. about where where scooters can ride. Amanda, do you want to tee it up?
Yeah, sure. So my question was, will there be dedicated street space for scooters in particular? So right now they're on our sidewalks usually, or maybe in the street, and our sidewalks are poor. And then if they're in the street, obviously it's a little bit dangerous. So can we talk dedicated micromobility lanes or widening our sidewalks? Like what infrastructure investment will we get? Particularly on transit corridors, places like that, where we really need this kind of safe space for people to move around.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, and that's a good question. And really, we don't differentiate micromobility from kind of our current multimodal bicycle infrastructure. So as I mentioned before, kind of where we ended up with the ordinance was, if you can ride a bike, you can ride a scooter there. If you can't ride a bike there, you can't ride a scooter there. So we don't want folks riding on the sidewalk, just as we don't want folks riding bicycles on the sidewalk. Now, similar to bikes, there's some exceptions, whether you're parking or disembarking on that. But really, this goes to show, and you know, and I think that's been one of the benefits of the micromobility program, is it has brought in a new audience to really kind of experience what the current multimodal infrastructure, bike lane infrastructure is. And really, you know, I see Jill on the call. I know Streets Partnership has welcomed these. You're bringing in a whole new audience to advocate for expanded multimodal infrastructure on there. So we really don't see a differentiation. We really, and part of that is we also want to be flexible to what's next. You know, obviously we were pretty reactive to how scooters came to Denver, and we don't want to make things so narrow that, you know, who knows what's next. We always used to joke about taxi drones, but, you know, in the last year that seems less and less unlikely. But really, this is part of a multimodal strategy, and really building out that multimodal network and the 125 miles of bike lanes, that works for scooters too.
A number of people have talked about parking issues, where they're parked, or their virtual corrals. Gary Hardy teed up a question really nicely. Gary, do you want to give it a pitch?
Yeah, thank you. I just have seen a few of these parking corrals put very close to the intersection, and I think that benefits everybody, not only the motorists, but cyclists and pedestrians, because it gives them better visibility of cars approaching an intersection. And I think that's a much better use of space for micro-mobility parking than it is for another SUV to be parked that close to the corner.
Sure, yeah, and Stephen kind of touched on it, but with this RFQ as opposed to the pilot, you will see more physical infrastructure. You will also see, and kind of depending on who's doing what and when, you have seen certain operators implement virtual infrastructure that encourages folks to park in a certain area, even if there's not, you know, a physical corral there, you know, just through the use of GPS and pricing and things like that. You know, Denver has a off-street parking program, kind of a below the curb bike corrals, things like that you've seen. We expect this program to integrate into that, you know, which hopefully will expand kind of that bike non-vehicle parking for all folks, for folks riding their personal bikes, their personal scooters, things like that. So yeah, things like that, putting parking in the site triangle, those are all things we're considering.
Thanks. Molly McKinley had a couple questions. Molly, could you ask your question about the percentage of bikes and your question about rebalancing?
Yes, Nick, I have many questions, but I will try to shorten them here. So question one, if people, commuters, visitors, Denverites love bikes, why only require 20% of the number of scooters or the number of devices to, you know what I'm trying to ask? Why 20%?
Yeah, and to be clear, that's the floor here. And you know, this is the challenge when you're dealing with a private company that is certainly responding to market desires. Kind of when we talked about the with the dockless pilot, having quickly 5 scooter permits and 1.5 bike permits when 5 were on offer, really, we know the market is trying to move more towards scooters, that they're the hot item. That's where the money was at the time. And it was reflected in kind of usage on there. So with the RFQ, we didn't want to leave it to the market and to chance totally. Now we have to strike a balance here because we still need these companies to apply and we still need these companies to stick around. Again, the challenges of working with a private company driven by profit on there. So what we did was we required, if you're going to apply for this program, if you're going to propose, you are providing both scooters and bikes. And we have this floor here. We'd love to see the popularity of bikes expand. Stephen kind of touched on it. We do see on average a little bit longer average trip with that. And I think that is just kind of the nature of the vehicle. Folks aren't jumping on a bike to experience something new on a lark. Whereas, I think with scooters, certainly initially you were seeing that. And so we do really value having bikes in the system, and that's reflected in that requirement, in that floor. Now, we also know that there is a limit on what we can force until we're not getting proposers or we're not getting companies. So hoping that we have setting that floor keeps the system out there, keeps the bikes out there, and allows for growth as popularity. Because if more people are wanting bikes, they'll get more bikes. These companies are going to respond to demand. Kind of a roundabout answer, but hopefully that lets you in on our thinking.
Thanks. And Joel, can I ask my second question?
Please do.
Awesome. So you mentioned that the providers will be required to rebalance the system daily to provide devices in the equity areas. Can you speak to how those providers will be held accountable to doing so? And then, just thinking about how many equity neighborhoods there are in Denver, I'm just wondering what number of devices will be required in those areas, and just how does that work?
So one of the nice things about scooters, and kind of one of the side kind of interests with scooters, is I think folks have touched on that they're all obviously GPS tracked. And as a part of our agreement with the companies currently, and certainly under the new program, we have access to that data. So we can see, aggregated and done in a way that we're not getting personally identifiable information from folks. We have a pretty good handle on where vehicles are at any time. And in fact, our participation with DRCOG, Regional Council of Governments, has enabled us to work with a company called Ride Report that allows a very convenient dashboard where we can pull up all of our operators and see where they are and put on such filters so we can know on a daily basis and get alerts if the operators aren't meeting the requirements for that. And so that's what really allows us, and I think to your second question, the 30%. So each day, 30% of the vehicles, and that was something during the pilot, we were at about 25%, and it varied depending on how fleets grew. But we felt 30% was an aggressive and appropriate requirement to deploy in these areas. Because as we said before, and you saw, these aren't in the city core, and felt that was a appropriate requirement to make this a more equitable program for the city from a geographic standpoint. Let me know if that didn't answer your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nick.
Great.
Thanks. Well, we're at the amount of time we had for this topic. I'm going to sneak in just one more, kind of combining two questions I saw from Jill and from Lucia. You talked a lot about operators coming and going in the pilot. And with the new program, there's a lot of requirements to have vehicles where they may not get the most trips per day. They wouldn't naturally gravitate there because it's less economical. What sort of agreement, or what kind of approach do you have to have some confidence that whoever the selected providers or providers won't just disappear?
Sure. We have, similar to OFO, if these companies go out of business, obviously there's nothing we can do about that. I don't want to get into, we have some clauses in the license agreement that I can't get into at this point, but I will say generally, I think the biggest reason to feel confident in folks staying here has been the success of this market. We were very upfront about what our requests were and what our needs were in the RFQ on there. So this is not a surprise. Really, it's up to these companies to decide if this is going to work. We had very good response to our RFQ. Been very upfront throughout the negotiation process. Again, there is always a risk when you're dealing with a private company driven by profit and in a volatile kind of tech startup based company industry on that. We are confident that if scooters are a thing, if these companies are in fact, they want to be in Denver. This is a great market, huge usage numbers, and kind of interestingly enough, just anecdotally hear from folks that not only do we have very high usage rates, we also have very low kind of vandalism and damage rates. So, you'll see it here and there, but compared to a lot of other markets, I guess we're Denver nice and we take care of our things in general. There's always a few bad apples, but yeah, kind of that's a challenge, but it's one we've tried to address through some clauses of the agreement, but really I think is going to be more fully addressed by just the popularity and the value of the Denver market.
Great. Well, everything's an experiment, and I appreciate what you're doing here. Sorry the timing didn't work out for the announcement. I'm sorry as the organizer that we weren't able to participate in an announcement, but we'll keep our eyes peeled the next couple of weeks, and I'm sure when it's ready, everyone will hear about it from every direction.
Yes, you will, and we'll come back. We're always happy. I really appreciate the opportunity to come speak to folks. Our last meeting with you all, I think, was very beneficial, and the feedback we received absolutely was integrated into the RFQ. So we really appreciate INC as kind of a input source.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite up Avi Stopper. Avi, you should be set up to share your screen. Avi is the founder of the Bike Streets Project. He's going to give an update of a couple things they've been doing during the pandemic. Avi.
Hey guys. Video. I'm somewhere in here. There I am. Thanks so much for having me, Joel. I really appreciate it. I miss seeing everyone in person. Welcome, I suppose, to my basement. Anyhow, the North Star of the Bike Streets Project, if you're not familiar with it, is to try to experiment with citizen-led ways to get 100,000 people on bikes every day in Denver. And I want to just add a little bit of context. I've been doing some consulting, some conservation consulting work recently, and a lot of conservation organizations are referring to the decade in which we find ourselves as, ominously, the now or never decade. And I think that community-based, citizen-based solutions to climate change are as important as ever, perhaps more important than ever, alongside all of the robust work that so many of our government organizations and agencies are doing. So within that context, we're pushing hard and running lots of citizen-led experiments to try to get as many people as we possibly can riding bikes in Denver. Just a little aside, I took this shot like maybe 2.5 hours ago up at Inspiration Point. If you haven't ridden there, you need to go there. And I just, every time I go there, and in fact, every time I ride pretty much anywhere in Denver, I find myself marveling how easy it is to get around the city on bikes. And if you're not familiar with the Bike Streets map, needless to say, if you are, I took plenty of Bike Streets routes to get up there today, and it was most delightful. It's in the northwest corner of Denver, and if you haven't been there, it's magnificent. It has probably the best view, unfettered, of the mountains anywhere in town. But with that said, it's pretty easy to get around Denver. The question really becomes, how can we as a community start to think about changing the culture of how we get around. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. And if you're familiar with a little bit of what we've done in the past, this is a slight departure, a little bit more of a community organizing focus. So what I'm here really to ask you, my ask of you, all ye swarthy bike advocates and activists, is to ask you to pledge to ride your bike a paltry 2 miles a week. Now, I'm guessing that that's a small ask of this group because you all ride much more than 2 miles a week. But I think that that's a really symbolic gesture. And I think that it's a significant flag being planted in the ground, because I think that it gives us a way to open a conversation with people that we know in our community who are also interested, perhaps curious about riding bikes. Setting a very simple threshold to cross once a week, just 2 miles, isn't a gigantic ask, but it has really significant potential implications if we can get lots of people to do it. So lo and behold, it is the Denver 2 miles bike pledge, and I encourage you to sign up. You can do that at bikestreets.com. It's a really simple pledge. Pledge to ride your bike 2 miles each week over the course of the year. If it's too cold, if you're out of town, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. But we want to try to set a standard where as many people as possible in our community are riding their bike at least 2 miles a week. So as you may recall, you may be familiar with the first iteration or incarnation of the Bike Streets project. This is the first experiment that we've been running for quite some time. Basically, it started with a set of observations that I had riding north on Emerson from my house in Wash Park to the Cherry Creek Trail. I just kept having this type of interaction far too frequently. And so what I started to do was ride generally one street over. So this was Emerson, this is Ogden, one street over. And I just found that my bike ride every day went from this sort of stress-inducing type of experience to just a relaxed stroll in the park. And so incrementally, bit by bit, as I rode all around town, I started to look for these types of streets that made it really easy to get from one place to another and where there weren't those sorts of unpleasant interactions with cars. And we rallied a big group of volunteers. Eventually, there were about 150 people who participated in this community crowdsourced mapping project. And through that process, we created the Bike Streets map. So this is the paper version of the Bike Streets map, and we printed this and published it in the summer of 2019. And since then, we've given away about 20,000 free paper maps. Actually, we gave those away in about 6 weeks. We don't have any more at this juncture. The online version of the Bike Streets map has been used 370,000 times, and we have published 2 free open source mobile apps, one for Android and one for iPhone, that you can download in the respective stores if you're so inclined. And moreover, if you're someone from a local government or someone from a community group, anywhere in the world, you can take this code because it's open source and build your own open source mobile app project on top of it. Personally, I'm really, this has totally transformed my relationship with the city, and I'm closing in on about 10,000 miles ridden on these routes over the last 3.5 years. And what I want to say about this is not to sort of sound off or to my own horn, but I've done a lot of these miles with my kids. I've done a lot of these miles with my wife. I've done a lot of these miles with many of you. And what this has led me to believe is that while, yes, there are really substantial infrastructure needs yet to be met, there are really amazing ways to get around the community, to navigate around the community as it stands right now. Is it perfect? No, but is it totally imperfect or unacceptable? I think it's far from that. The reality is that you can go places in Denver on a bike now. For example, I just rode 15 miles to Inspiration Point and back. It was really lovely. I encourage you to do it. Maybe not in the snowstorm unless you've got a big fat bike. But anyhow, I think that infrastructure is clearly part of the solution. And I'm so encouraged by all the remarkable work that's being done on the infrastructure side of things. I think the other component that we often talk about less than infrastructure, because infrastructure is really interesting and fun to talk about, and curiosity provoking and all sorts of cool stuff like that. But I think that we often talk less about behavioral change. And behavioral change, as many of us know, it's just really, really hard. And so what we're dealing with, what we're up against as it relates to creating a cultural shift is what is genuinely one of the most ingrained and entrenched human behaviors, which is that the vast majority of people in our society just assume that when it's time to go someplace, what do? You grab the keys and you hop in the car. And so what we're dealing with is this incredibly deep, entrenched, challenging behavior that we have to overcome. And cars, many folks find them really delightful. They have seat warmers, they have radios, and no matter how glib we might like to be, the experience of being in a car, I think we have to acknowledge for a lot of folks is what they're accustomed to, and it's what they like. Not that they don't know necessarily what some of the other options are, but it's just what they're acclimated and accustomed to. And I think as we think about a cultural shift, we need to think about this and empathize with the perspective of the vast majority of people who are using this as their primary way of getting around. So over the course of the summer, I revisited this book. I assume that many of you have read it. A number of us were in attendance when the author Adonia Lugo presented Bicycle Race. And I found this to be a really important book to revisit during the Black Lives Matter protests. And one of the things that I found really compelling and interesting about this was that Adonia presents this idea of human infrastructure. She says that often we get way too focused on physical infrastructure and concrete and all that good stuff, and we overlook the idea of what she describes as human infrastructure. I found this to be a really powerful idea. And the way kind of in essence that she describes it is that human infrastructure is about building networks of support and a culture that supports this type of behavior. It's about building inroads into communities that normalize this type of behavior, that normalize getting on a bike, rather than just assuming that when you need to go somewhere, you grab the keys and you hop in the car. And ultimately, it comes down to a lot of old school community organizing, getting people out one at a time to go on bike rides, to get people in their communities on a micro scale out on bikes, to really start to make this the sort of thing that has a community groundswell. And I think that we are it's a risky proposition for us to assume that, and one of the things that she talks about at length in this book is to assume that if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come is sort of this philosophy that, the more physical infrastructure exists, you're just going to naturally see this increase in bicycling. And that indeed may be the case. But again, as it relates to the now or never decade, I think we want to really ask ourselves and consider, do we want to put all our eggs in one basket? Do we think that this is in and of itself adequate? And given the rate at which it's rolling out, do we think that that alone is going to get us to the place that we need to be? Which brings us to this second Bike Streets experiment, the 2 miles pledge. So, of course, the question is, why just 2 miles? I mean, for many of us who ride bikes a lot, 2 miles is trivial. This is what 2 miles looks like. It's basically from Cheeseman Park over to, it doesn't even get you to Lincoln. It's basically from Cheeseman Park on the west side back to Cheeseman Park. That's 2 miles. So it's not really that substantial. But really, it's not about length. It's not about distance. It's not about the number of rides. It's about the fact that someone is getting on a bike once a week and getting out there. So it's easy to accomplish 2 miles. If you think about the people in your life who might be interested in getting on a bike, but are pretty nervous about it, or pretty apprehensive, or don't have the sort of time or structure, it's an easy thing. It's a low bar for them to accomplish, but also allows them to start to build this new habit, to explore this new behavior without totally committing or getting in way over their heads saying, I'm going to ride, 50 miles a week or something like that. So 2 miles, at least our hypothesis is that it is something that's compelling to folks because it's like, I can do that, but it also has the impact in a structured fashion where you're essentially pledging to do it once a week to get you out and do it over and over and over again. It's not a single isolated ride that you go and do once. It's something that you do as a repeated behavior. And the way that we're looking at this is basically, let's start with a few people. So I want to encourage and invite you folks who really care about this issue to get out there and to participate in this, even if you feel like 2 miles is a trifling amount. We start with a few people, and incrementally we start to tell our friends about it. And we get people who care about these types of issues, at least in the abstract, to give it a go. We get more and more friends to ride just a couple miles a week, once a week, but on an ongoing basis. And then bit by bit, that could, at least our hypothesis suggests, change the culture on a more substantial level in the long term. This is the hypothesis that we're exploring, and I want to invite you to and encourage you to help us explore this. It's in many cases, for a lot of you, something that you're already doing. You're out there every week, or perhaps even more every day, out riding your bike. But we need a rallying cry as a community for us to get other people who we really think are likely candidates to be out riding bikes, to make it easy for them to start, to give them a simple, actionable thing that they can undertake, where they can actually go out and get something done and start to move in the direction that we think is an important direction to move. So here's where we are. We just finished the first week. We have 525 folks signed up to do this. And in the first week, 91% of those folks reported that they rode their 2 miles. And I think that it comes down to this. Let's, as a community, as a group of people, let's work together to make it normal to ride a bike. I think that in many cases, people look at those of us who are out riding bikes already, and they think that we're not particularly normal, that it's something that you have to be super hardcore or intense to do. I think that we as a community, we as people who care about this issue, it would really behoove us, it will behoove the things we care about, to work together to make it a normal activity, to make this behavior something that we're all out doing and that we're encouraging folks to give a little try, so that the next generation of folks are interested in this and feel like it's something that they can accomplish. And yes, maybe they start with 2 miles, maybe they ride to the park, and then maybe they ride to the grocery store. And then bit by bit, incrementally, they work this into their habits more and more. And again, the idea with 2 miles and 2 miles per week is it's just an easy, simple excuse and maybe a little bit of peer pressure to hop on a bike. So kind of the underlying hypothesis of this project is that a little bit of structure, a little incentive might make a really big difference in helping us move the culture in the direction that we want it to move. So I want to invite you to take the pledge to join us. And I want to invite you to think about this as us as a community working together to try to create the change that we seek. You can sign up at bikestreets.com, and I am very open to feedback, suggestions, and any ideas that you have that we can continue to experiment with and to work into the stuff that we're doing.
Thank you so much.
So that's it, yeah.
This is fantastic. Every time I hear you speak, whether it's here or another forum, I think you're talking right to me. I'm the person who needs to get my bike out and pump up the tires and use it more. And the photos you always present about, this is a street that someone like me, I don't really enjoy biking on. These are streets I can just bike on. It's really wonderful.
All right, Joel, you need to sign the pledge and ride your bike 2 miles. You can still get those 2 miles in before the snowpocalypse hits tomorrow. I'm going to hold you. I'm holding you to it.
Thank you very much. Please go to bikestreets.com. We're going to move to our last topic so that we can end on time. But I couldn't not, when I saw Avi's email about this message, about this effort, work him into the agenda here. Just one of my favorite efforts ever. I'd like to next introduce Lisa Houde with DRCOG. We're transitioning from near-term and immediate-term, things you can do now, to ending the meeting looking at the longer term. DRCOG, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, is just finishing up their 2050 Metro Vision Plan, and I'll just hand it directly over to Lisa to walk us through it.
All right, thanks, Joel. Hi, everybody. I am excited for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. You guys have already had an awesome agenda. It's been really fun to listen to all the topics you've already gone through. But Joel gave us a good intro that we are moving into the long range view of transportation. So We are here to talk to you today about our draft 2050 Metro Vision Regional Transportation Plan. And we want to give you, it's a long plan with lots of details, so we want to give you a pretty high level overview and just give you an idea of what's in the plan. We're going to hope to integrate a little bit of interactive polling throughout this presentation just to get your first impressions. But overall, I'm really hoping to pique your interest enough to learn more about the plan and provide more input through this presentation. So we've been out and about in the region over the last couple of weeks, going to transportation advisory boards, stakeholder groups, lots of people like you just talking about this regional transportation plan, making sure that people know it's available to review. And yeah, we're excited to talk to you today. So I'll introduce myself. I am Lisa Houde. I am the public engagement specialist for the Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG, and two of my colleagues are here and they're going to be presenting with me tonight. So Jacob, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. I'm Jacob Rieger. I'm the Long Range Transportation Planning Manager at DRCOG and really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight.
And we also have Alvin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alvin Villat-Sanchez, and I'm a transportation planner here.
All right. So for those of you, DRCOG actually, I think, got referenced in almost every presentation so far tonight. But for those of you that are not familiar with the Denver Regional Council of Governments, we are the group of 58 member governments in the Denver region who all come together to work on those complicated issues that really cross municipal boundaries. So that's like aging, environment, regional growth, and transportation is one of our main functions. And developing this regional transportation plan is a really important part of DRCOG. We have a really fun introductory little video. We don't have time to show it tonight, but I will put the link in the chat if you all are interested. You can check out our fancy little video about the plan, but we'll talk about it through some slides later. So I'm going to actually pass it over to Alvin, and he's going to start with kind of the nuts and bolts of the RTP.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I'll go into some of the steps we took to get to our draft review before handing it over to Jacob to go into example investments and example outcomes we're hoping to see. So there are a lot of different reasons we have a regional transportation plan and a function within our region. I'll just touch on a couple of the key aspects here. When you go into our plan, what we're showing are projects and programs that we think can be included over the next 30 years. So this isn't a wish list of projects. We have to make sure that we're not over programming projects with our limited funding that we expect to be available. We are looking out to 2050, so it is a 30-year plan, but we do have to make sure we're not over programming. We look at all aspects of our transportation system, so not just roads or transit, but how are people biking and walking in the region. We also look at the impacts of the transportation system. So what does safety look like today? What do we want it to look like in 2050? How are freight and goods moving in the region? What does air quality look like now? What do we want to look like in the future? The long-range plan sets the vision for the future, but we also have a short-range plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, that actually implements the priorities within our long-range plan. We do an update like this every 4 years, and we do it with all of our partners in the region. So CDOT, RTD, local governments, toll authorities, other transportation providers as well. We're looking at about a 2-year-long process to develop this plan. It's been broken down into 4 distinct stages. There's been a public engagement and a stakeholder engagement component with each of these, and the findings from each phase has fed into the subsequent phase. We're moving towards April adoption and ultimately federal approval this summer. Even after we've approved and adopted the plan, there are still chances to amend it in between our regular 4-year update cycles. So there's always a chance, as conditions change, priorities change, needs change, we can change the plan in between our regular 4-year cycles. Like I mentioned, there's been a lot of engagement on both the public and stakeholder side. We've done a couple of different methods for each of those, and we've heard some consistent themes from each of those groups. In terms of the public engagement we've done, there's been an interest in high quality transit, more choices for people being able to bike, walk, and roll throughout the region, and making sure folk are safe doing it. Compared to that, there's been less interest in funding new roads and new highways, and tied to that is maintaining the system that we have. There's also been an interest in improving our air quality in the region, so reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of stakeholder engagement, they've wanted us to make sure that we're including projects that are multimodal and touch on all aspects of traveling in the region, not just roads, transit, but projects that do a lot of different things, as well as making sure projects provide a regional benefit. We've also wanted to make sure projects are spread throughout the region and reflect the different needs of our various communities. And then there's also been an interest in improving our air quality, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our stakeholder groups as well. We've provided a number of different ways folk can engage with the plan. You can read the whole plan, you can read chapters of the plan, or even just our executive summaries or our fact sheets in English and Spanish. But throughout the plan, we have a lot of different information ranging from all the different engagement we've done to get to this point. We talk about the current conditions of our system, some of the finances we're looking at to invest in the plan, some of the outcomes that we're looking at, and some of the analysis we do. And then we also have a number of different technical appendices for folk who really want to get into methodologies, forecasts that we use to develop our assumptions. And then I'm gonna hand it over to Jacob, and he'll discuss some example investments and some example outcomes we're hoping to see through our plan.
Great, thanks, Alvin. So what we're going to do for the next few slides, they're organized around the 6 themes that you see here. And these 6 themes really rose to the top throughout our planning process. So we actually organized the plan around these 6 themes, and we want to talk about what's in the plan that addresses each of these themes. While I know our time is getting short, we do want to try and do some interactive, what's known as Mentimeter polling around each of these. So I'm going to give you some information on each of these, and then we'll ask you a couple of quick questions as we go through each of these 6 topics. So let's start with safety. There's a lot of information on this slide. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through everything on this slide. I wish we could give separate presentations on each of these 6 themes, frankly, but just in the short time we have, a couple of things to point out here. One of the things we're doing here is taking a lot of the great planning work that's been done either by DRCOG, local governments, CDOT, RTD, or other stakeholders, and really rolling that up into the regional transportation plan. So for example, DRCOG was one of the first regional agencies in the US to adopt a regional Vision Zero action plan. That plan has been incorporated into the 2050 regional transportation plan. For the first time, we are specifically designating a set of safety projects, safety specific projects. We've always had safety in our plan, but this is the first time that we actually have a set of safety projects. And then we're also designating a financial allocation within our plan dedicated to continuing to identify and implement safety projects. So the idea is that, if this is one of our regional priorities, let's put our dollars where our priorities are, and let's actually make, those specific allocations in the financial plan. So as you see over on the right-hand side, $465 million in the plan for projects dedicated to safety improvements, $313 million for 11 safety projects, specific safety projects, and $152 million for the safety program over time. So what we're going to do, as I said, we're going to do some interactive polling. We're going to ask you to go to a website called menti.com. You see it on the screen there, menti.com. I'd recommend either if you're on a computer to open a separate screen or on your phone, whatever your device you're using, you should be able to do it. And then enter the code once you get there to menti.com, enter the code that you see 87341692. Maybe Alvin will put that in the chat. And then if you are QR code savvy, you can also scan the QR code that you see on this screen. So if you've had a chance to do that, as I said, I'm going to ask you 2 questions for each of these 6 themes. So we'll start with safety based on the about 15 seconds that I gave you on safety, but hopefully you've had a chance to look at the plan. How well do you think the 2050 plan will improve safety of the regional transportation system? And how important to you is the issue of safety in our regional transportation system? So what's going to happen is people start voting on this. You will see those results in real time, and they will shift around a bit as more votes come in. So we'll give this just a moment to give people a chance to vote.
And the code is in the chat as well as being on the top of the screen that's being shared.
Yeah, the code is 87341692. All right, it looks like we have about 19 votes. I know there's more people in this meeting than 19, but not everyone has to vote. Maybe we'll give this just one more second. But just in terms of the importance of the issue of safety, not a surprise, 9.8, super important issue to you that we know, and super important to us in the entire region. How well do you think the 2050 plan will improve the safety of the regional transportation system? Right now we're at about a 3.6. So let's go on to the next topic, but we'll do this for each of these topics. So the next topic is active transportation. I know you all are very familiar with this. You talked about it earlier this evening, walking, bicycling, anything that we do with human powered transportation. Interestingly, I think it was Nick Williams who talked about, or maybe another presenter who talked about, sort of that feeling of, interested but concerned about bicycling and wanting to have a safer and more expansive, regional active transportation system. Again, we're taking some of the work that we've done previously and our partners have done previously. DRCOG within the last couple of years has adopted an active transportation plan, and we're bringing that work directly into the 2050 regional transportation plan. And as with safety, we're identifying a set of specific active transportation projects. A couple of those you see on this slide, there's more in the plan. And like safety, we're dedicating an allocation in our financial plan to continue to identify and implement active transportation projects over the course of this plan. So again, we're being a bit briefer here than I'd like, frankly, in terms of being able to talk about each of these topics. But again, hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at the plan. So same two questions on the Mentimeter. How important to you is the issue of active transportation, and how well do you think the 2050 plan will improve the active transportation, active transportation within our region? So I'll give that a second to give you a chance to vote on that. All right, we seem to be holding steady at votes. So in terms of the importance of the issue, 9.8, no surprise, affirming to see that. How well do you think the plan will address active transportation? About a 3.6. So let's go to the next topic, air quality. Lots of information on this slide. Again, in the interest of time, I won't go through every single point on this slide, but a couple of points I do want to make. Air quality really is an all of the above strategy. And I know this was referenced earlier in the meeting as well. It's all of the multimodal investments that's in the plan. Again, it's not just infrastructure, it's more the services, the programs, the things that we all do across the region, transportation demand management, bike to work day, pre-pandemic, but certainly post-pandemic, the notion of teleworking and working from home, those sorts of things. It's all of the above and more to help us address our regional air quality conditions in this region and meet our air quality goals. I think it was mentioned earlier in this meeting, perhaps House Bill 1261, Colorado's Climate Action Plan, that is in the process of being implemented at this moment, but we have started to incorporate it within this regional transportation plan, and more will be coming on that. So rather than a list of specific projects like the other themes, again, it's really just more everything that's in the plan. But we have goals at DRCOG about wanting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And again, the project investments that we're making is all geared to help us address air quality conformity. It's actually one of our primary federal requirements, and that's what's noted at the bottom of this slide. We actually have to demonstrate, and we do some modeling in partnership with the state to be able to demonstrate that this plan actually meets all of the what are known as emissions budget tests that are set for this plan in the state implementation plan for air quality. So again, let's go back to the Mentimeter. I think you know the drill by now, same two questions based on my 10 seconds of presentation. But again, hopefully you've had a chance to look at the plan. How well do you think the 2050 regional transportation plan will improve air quality in the region? And how important to you is the issue of air quality? And we'll give this a second to populate.
While people are responding to the poll, of course, this is very abbreviated. Where can people read the plan and see the details, and how can they get more detailed comments in by, I think it's the 17th, about a week from now, deadline?
Yeah, thanks for that, Joel. We actually have a couple slides just after these set of slides where we'll talk about the different ways that folks can get input and how to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I just wanted to reiterate that this is just your first impressions on the topic, and there's lots more you can dig in, and we have a whole virtual open house where you can learn more. So we'll talk about that in a bit.
All right, so just real quick on the results of this issue on air quality, 9.8 in terms of importance and about a 3 in terms of initial impressions of how well you think the plan will address it. So a couple more of these to go through. Next one is multimodal mobility, kind of a mouthful of a term. Really what we're conveying here is that When we put this plan together, and particularly when we implement this plan with our project sponsors over time, and then again, this plan includes projects from local governments, Toll Highway Authority, CDOT, RTD, sort of the universe of transportation stakeholders in this region. So it's actually not DRCOG explicitly that's implementing these projects, but through our ability as the region's sort of transportation planning agency, we want to work with our project sponsors to implement these projects in the most multimodal way possible. So really our intent here is to both select projects that are multimodal and to implement them in a multimodal way. The philosophy was that projects included in the plan would have multimodal components to them, and that they would help us address several things at once. So that a transit project would also be a safety project. A safety project would be an air quality project, and so on and so forth. So that's really the philosophy behind this theme within the plan. So again, based on that way too brief overview, same two questions in the Mentimeter poll. How well do you think the 2050 plan will improve multimodal mobility of the regional transportation system? And how important to you is the issue of multimodal mobility? So we'll give this just a moment to populate. I think a couple of votes are still coming in, but in terms of the importance, 9.7, and in terms of how well it's addressed in the plan, about a 2.8. All right, just for a moment on freight, there's a lot of statistics on this slide as well. Really, though, the point we want to convey here is that freight is one of the themes that rose to the top during our planning process, may not be quite as obvious as some of the other topics that we're talking about this evening, but through the pandemic, I think we all have that shared experience of package delivery, food delivery, grocery delivery. So freight and goods movement is certainly important to our regional transportation system. Like some of these other themes, DRCOG, CDOT, others have adopted multimodal freight plans. We're bringing that work directly into the regional transportation plan. And like some of these other themes, we've identified a set of freight projects, but also a financial allocation, sort of a program category to continue to identify and implement freight projects over time. As with several of these themes, the idea is that, again, other projects in this plan will also further these particular goals. So in this case, freight. So again, super quick overview, but same two questions. How well do you think the 2050 plan will improve freight movement in the region, and how important to you is the issue of freight? All right, as votes come in, how important is the issue? It's about a 6 at the moment. That's actually consistent with what we've seen from some other presentations. Again, an important issue, but maybe not quite as important as some of the others. And how well do you think the plan will improve freight in the region? About 4.4. So last slide in this series, and then we have a couple wrap-up slides, as I indicated. Last thing we want to talk about is regional transit. There's a lot in the plan around transit. It's really hard to summarize on one slide. I know there's a lot on this slide, but the plan includes financial allocations sort of day-to-day, financial allocations to operate and maintain our existing bus and rail system. It includes a dedicated, well, a specific, I should say, bus rapid transit network to help to implement RTD's regional BRT feasibility study. So we have approximately 8 to 10 bus rapid transit corridor projects in this plan to actually build a BRT network across the region. We have several other corridors in the plan that we're calling transit planning corridors. Those are corridors where transit is a priority, but more work needs to be done to identify that vision. So this plan includes some planning and financial resources to really help develop the vision for transit in those corridors to implement that. And then it also includes, in partnership with RTD, recognizing that RTD is about to restart their Reimagine RTD process, but this plan at this point does include the Northwest Rail Peak Period Service Plan. So a lot in here about transit. So again, you know the drill, same two questions on the Mentimeter poll. How well do you think the 2050 plan will improve regional transit, and how important to you is the issue of regional transit? So as votes come in, certainly extremely important issue 9.8 in terms of the importance of the issue and how well do you think the plan will improve regional transit, about a 3.8. So I think now I'm going to turn it back to Lisa and we're going to wrap up and talk a little bit more about how you can give input on this plan.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, we have just one final polling slide. I know it's felt a bit like speed dating with all of the topics that we cover in the plan, but since we've gone through each topic, I kind of want to just get an idea from a bigger picture. We all have an idea of what our ideal transportation system for the Denver region would be in 30 years. How well does this plan align with your ideal transportation system? All right, so a little bit of everything, somewhat well, very well, not at all well, leaning on that not so well side. All right, I'm gonna leave that poll up, but I'm gonna go back to these slides about how you can give more input so you can still answer on that one. But I just wanna share, I know we've given you a really high level overview tonight about the plan, but we do, like Joel said, we have about a week or so left of this draft plan review period, and we will have a public hearing before the DRCOG Board of Directors on the night of March 17th. So that Board of Directors is made up of representatives from all of those member governments that I mentioned make up DRCOG. So we're accepting public comment through March 17th. You're certainly welcome to attend the public hearing to speak directly to the Board of Directors. And then we also have this virtual open house that I mentioned. And I think Alvin or Jacob will throw this link in the chat. It was also on your agenda. But there you can find as much or as little detail as you want about the plan. So if you just want to see kind of short summaries about each of these topics, you can go there, submit responses to surveys. There's also discussion boards, or you can really dig into the full plan. It's a 180-page plan. There's 19 appendices. I'm sure there's a topic that interests you that you can dig into more. And then there's even, if you'd like to get as far as commenting directly on a map in the plan or a chart in the plan, there's also a way to directly mark up the plan. So there's an easy comment form where you can submit just general comments, or you can send emails to me and I will pass all of that input on, as well as the input that we've heard tonight, to our transportation committees and our board of directors. We also have, we didn't mention, there's an interactive map that you can find on that virtual open house where you can explore the projects in more detail so you can see the funding levels and timeline for implementation and things like that. So hope that you can find a way to dig in more and learn more about the plan and provide your input, because we really want to hear from as many people as possible to make sure that this plan really reflects the needs and priorities of the people in 2021 so we get to where we need to be by 2050. So really appreciate the time on your agenda and just the opportunity to talk with you tonight.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us late into an evening. At the INC Transportation Committee, we try to build connections so that people can be empowered to participate at all levels, whether they're going to take this information themselves and participate on any of these topics, or back to their neighborhood organizations or other groups that they're a part of. And I hope by having the wide range of topics here, there were almost certainly some that each of you were already plugged into. And this video will be put up online so people can see it, maybe some who weren't. But there's some other topics here, I think especially this last one, where many of us who are in active transportation and similar advocacy roles just in the city of Denver aren't necessarily tracking this regional, and where so much of the regional funding comes from and the priorities that are set by this plan. So although this had a different feel than some of the other topics, I think it's just as important in making those connections, improving transparency and helping people understand more ways to get involved. Genuinely appreciate it. Thank you to all three of you from DRCOG. We have reached the end of our meeting. I'm interested in your feedback on this approach of meeting every other month and having a dense meeting with a lot of different topics in it. So there's things to take away. Please drop a note to transportation@denverinc.org and let me know what you think about how this is going, what you'd like to see more or less of. In the meeting announcement, we announced the schedule for upcoming meetings. It's the second Thursday of the month, every other month. And so we will see you in 2 months in May. Thank you very much. Have a good night.